There always seems to be another person who could be perfect just a click away.
We seem to treat dating like shopping. It's like, I'm the buyer. Let's see if I want to buy you. We don't consider that the other person is also evaluating, do they want to be with us? We think we're the buyer the whole time.
What can therapy do to prepare someone for a relationship?
You can be really good at shooting baskets when you don't have other people on the court, but you get on the court and you're in a game, you're going to learn all different things. Oh, when that person goes there, this is what happens. This play didn't work because of this. You have no idea what you're going to be like in a relationship.
Modern dating offers us this tantalizing promise. We have more ways than ever to find another person, which means it's got to be possible to find that perfect someone, the one that you're destined for. But that promise has often proven to be false, in part because modern dating also gives us the illusion that perfection is out there, that we can find someone who doesn't require us to make compromises or live with something that might be a little annoying, because relationships are by their nature an awkward merger. You take two people with two different families, different histories, different habits, and frequently very different theories about the correct way to load a dishwasher, and then you put these two people in a house and ask them to build a life together. Of course there's going to be conflict. Of course there's going to be disappointment. And of course each person is going to occasionally wonder why the other cannot simply become more reasonable, which is to say, becoming more like them. So how do we tell the difference between having standards and having unrealistic standards, between setting a healthy boundary and ruling really good people out of bounds, between working through a rough patch and staying too long in a relationship that really just isn't working? My guest today has spent years thinking and writing about exactly these questions. Lori Gottlieb is a psychotherapist. She's also the New York Times Ask the Therapist columnist, and she's the author of Maybe You Should Talk to Someone and Marry Him, The Case for Settling for Mr. Good Enough. Lori, welcome to the show. Let me start by asking you an easy question, or what should be an easy question. What is therapy for? What does it do for people?
Therapy helps us to understand ourselves and the way we relate in the world, both the way we relate to ourselves and the way we relate to others. And usually, because there's something that's not going right with that, we need to understand what's getting in our way.
You know, I tried therapy in college, and it didn't take, but it does seem to help a lot of people who are perhaps not as walled off as I am. But who is a good candidate for therapy?
So I should say first, therapy is not for everyone. So I'm glad that you mentioned that for you, it wasn't something that was helpful. I don't think everybody needs to go to therapy. I think that therapy is one way of many ways that when people are feeling like they're struggling with something, or they're confused about something, or they're feeling sad, or they're feeling anxious, or they're having relational difficulties, or they're having intrusive thoughts, or they just can't figure out why their life isn't going the way that they imagine it can go, then I think it's really helpful to almost get a really good second opinion on your life from someone who's not already in your life. The people in your life all have a stake in your life in a way that a therapist can maybe look at something from a distance. And sometimes that is a very different kind of help than someone in your life can give you.
And how often are you telling someone something they already basically know? And how often are you surprising them?
I would say it's a combination of the two. You know, I talk a lot. I've written about the difference between idiot compassion and wise compassion. So idiot compassion is what our friends do. You know, yeah, you were right. They were wrong. You know, we back up our friends. And even if we notice there's a pattern, we don't tend to call our friends out on it. It's kind of like if a fight breaks out in every bar you're going to, maybe it's you. We probably aren't going to say that to our friends, or we might feel hesitant to say that to our friends. And in therapy, what we offer is wise compassion, which is we hold up a mirror to you and help you to see something that maybe you haven't been willing or able to see. So is it a surprise? Sometimes. Is it something that maybe you had an inkling about but didn't want to or weren't willing to look at? Sometimes. I think that we need to give people credit in terms of, I think whether it's to my advice column or in my practice, I think a lot of people have a sense of the answer, but they need some kind of support around activating around the answer or even accepting the answer.
So I'm an avid reader of your New York Times column, and one that I really stuck with me was a guy who wrote in and was like, "I just realized I'm a jerk, and I've been a jerk for like 30 years." And you were surprisingly kind to him. You were like, "No, maybe you're not a jerk. Go check in with your friends." Um, how often are you doing that? And where you're talking people off an excessively negative self-image, perhaps? And how often are you doing the opposite of talking people down from thinking that the problem is everyone but them?
I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people have a balanced view of themselves and others. So it's not binary. It's not you're a jerk or you're a saint. It's most of us are somewhere in between. And we all have days and moments that are not our finest moments. And that doesn't make someone all one thing. I look at it as we're kind of snapshots. You find someone in a particular moment and you can paint them with that brush. But I think that what we're trying to do is trying to get a more accurate version of how people perceive us and how we perceive ourselves. So what this letter writer was saying was, he had been ghosted by a friend and the other friends in the group weren't intervening. And he sort of assumed that I must be a terrible person. I must be a jerk. I don't know. I don't know this person. This is just a letter. But it seemed like the person who wasn't communicating with him was kind of being a jerk too, right? Like there are ways where you can say to someone, hey, when they had gone on vacation and then the person ghosted him, you can say, this is what happened on our trip, or this bothered me, right? And the other person just, it almost was like bullying in a way. And I don't use that lightly. It's not a common thing, I would say, but to kind of ostracize someone from a group without communicating with them what the problem is just cruel. So there are two people in this interaction, and we have to remember that most of us are relating in a dyad or in a group. So it's not just that we're relating in the world in isolation.
One thing that struck me about that is that was a kind of strange thing to do to someone that you've known for that long, to just cut them off abruptly. And it seems to me that people are struggling more with things like that. Maybe, but I might just be romanticizing the past. But I mean, is there something about the kind of online age, the internet era, the culture of, relentless self-improvement and self-care that makes us more likely to do those things now than to stick with it?
I think what's different is that there is this idea that it is empowering, if you are not getting your wants or needs met, to cut someone off. That somehow is showing that you honor your self-worth in some way. And to me, that's just anti-relational. That of course there are going to be difficult people in our lives. And then the question is, what do we want to do? And what is the level of difficulty? Are there times when it is necessary for, someone is dangerous, and you cut them off? Sure. But more of the time, and not, again, not always, but more of the time, what I'm seeing is that people are very quick to kind of create disconnection in their lives, to cut people off instead of trying to kind of see if something can be worked through. There's not a lot of curiosity about what might be going on with the other person.
Absolutely. You had one letter where one person was clean, the other person was messy. And you said, well, why don't you get a cleaning lady? But they said, well, but we wouldn't have to if they would just, clean up everything. And you said, well, but that's not the person you married, right?
Right. So, what she said was my husband is loving, and, all these complimentary things about how wonderful her husband is. And then there's the question of, yeah, but he's so messy, and we wouldn't have to spend money on this. And it wasn't, by the way, there are times when you really can't afford it. This wasn't that
Yeah, yeah,
situation.
absolutely.
The situation was, no, no, we can afford it, but why should we have to? And it's because you married someone who's messy. So you can either keep getting frustrated by this and creating conflict. And then her point of view is, no, he's creating the conflict by not cleaning up. But there are just some people where it's just really hard. You might be one of them. They're just, it's really hard to be neat. It just is. And so why create this kind of cycle, this pattern, this dynamic in your relationship when it can be solved another way? But I think her interpretation was, if he cared, by the way, that if thing is always very dangerous. If this, then that. If you loved
Right.
me, if you cared, if you prioritized me, you would X. So if he cared enough about me and why this frustrates me so much, then he would change his behavior. And so, but I could turn that around and say, like, if she cared enough, she would get a cleaning lady, right? So,
Yes, we never think about giving ourselves the personality transplant. It's the other person who's obviously in need, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And again, I mean, look, I always say, before diagnosing someone with depression, make sure they aren't surrounded by assholes. So there are difficult people. I am not denying that. And you don't have to choose to be around difficult people. But when you
right.
are with people who have so many qualities that you really enjoy, that it seems like a lot of people are saying, but there's this thing. And sometimes it's a big thing and it is a deal breaker. I have a whole,
Yeah.
many, many columns about deal breakers. But sometimes we make it into a deal breaker, or we make it into something that creates all of this unpleasantness in an otherwise really, really strong, lovely relationship.
But you talked about settling, and this actually leads me into something I really wanted to talk to you about. You wrote a book. God, is it 15 years now? Close, I would say, because it was right.
More,
You wrote,
yeah, yeah. It was
yeah,
2010. hmm
wow, called
I
"Marry
think. I
Him:
think it was
Case
2010.
for
hmm
Settling."
Well, yes, but
So
I just want to, say up front, because you mentioned the title. We almost pulled the book because it is not a book about settling. It was based on an Atlantic piece that I had written that went viral of that title. And again, I don't choose the titles, but the Atlantic piece was supposed to be a kind of a humorous piece with a serious message. So the humor was kind of, there were a lot of sort of examples in there, but the serious message was asking a question: was, are we expecting too much in another human being? Like, can one human being fulfill all of these ideas we have about
right,
what marriage should be like? And so the book is different. The book is a very deeply researched book about what are the qualities that make for the strongest, happiest long-term marriages, and what are we looking for those qualities when we're dating? And this was so long ago. This is like pre all the social media, pre a lot of the stuff on the internet. And I think it is, it's something that, it's interesting because even all these years later, I still get like wedding photos and baby pictures and 10-year anniversaries and things like that. I think people, understandably, by the way, I would also be put off by the title. I think a lot of people did not read the book because of the title. And then somehow someone, got them to read it, or different people read it. And the people who have read it have generally found it to be very useful. And it relates to some of what we've been talking about today, about these ideas we have about what our expectations are of other human beings.
yeah. So I have read the book. It was a great book. I really enjoyed it. You know what you said is right. The argument that this is somehow about like just picking some schlub and that you don't love and marrying them is really wrong. It's about figuring out what actually matters in the person you love.
Right. I think the irony is that I think people assumed that it was about lowering your standards. And actually, the book was about having higher standards, but about the things that mattered. So it was about letting go of the things that don't actually matter as much as you think that they do, and then raising your standards on things that people don't care about enough. They kind of overlook for some reason. It's like generosity, the character qualities. Do you have similar values?
Yeah.
How do you deal with conflict with each other? reliability, all of these things that are just so core to a satisfying, and by satisfying, I don't mean like a C, I mean like an A, right? The kind of relationship that I think, we all want in a marriage, but but people kind of say, oh yeah, no, but I love him so much, even though he doesn't call me when he says he will, and it leaves me never knowing where we are. You hear this all the time. It's like you have to make those other qualities really important, and those are the deal breakers, not the other things that you think are deal breakers.
There's a line that really sticks with me from a movie called I think it's In Good Company. It has Topher Grace and Dennis Quaid in it. And Dennis Quaid has this great marriage, and Topher Grace, who is in love with Dennis Quaid's daughter, says, how do you do it? And he says, you pick the one you want to be in a foxhole with.
Mm.
And I have thought about that line over and over in 16 years of marriage, that the most important thing, look, my husband is delightful and handsome and funny and wonderful. Um, and those are the things that I noticed about him immediately. The things that I didn't know was how great he would be at supporting my career, and how proud he would be of me, and how hard he would work to, make stuff happen when I have to travel for work, and how reliable and great and amazing that would be. That's the stuff that's hard to see on an app, right? It's hard to, there's nothing on your Hinge profile that says this guy is going to get up with a baby at 2 a.m. and let you sleep.
No, but you know what? That's part of getting to know people. But people think, well, that's so unromantic to talk about things like, how are we going to deal with money if we end up together? How are we going to think about our careers? Where do we want to live? Do we want to have children? If so, how many? How do we think about that? Of course, your answers can change over time when you're actually experiencing those things, but at least you're having the conversations and getting a sense of how you both think about these things. A lot of people come to me for premarital therapy, not because they're having any problems. They have zero problems. They're coming because they want to learn, how do we talk about some of these things that people think are, you're just supposed to, if you're in love and you're aligned, then it's all going to work out. But sometimes there are things about your partner that will surprise you because you have not talked about those things. Like, wait, what do you mean you want to live near your parents? I didn't know that. What do you mean you think that I should take off time with the baby, but you shouldn't? Um, you know, like you need to actually talk about what it will be like to be married, not just what is it like now during this great phase, but what will it be like when we're married, and what happens when we have competing needs and wants. What happens when we have slightly different ideas about things? Hopefully your values aren't too far apart, but you might have slightly different ideas. You were raised in different soil, so how do you talk about that? We all have these ideas that we just assume the other person shares, but they don't necessarily share them because they grew up with a different family and different experiences.
Well, I think it's that you don't want to think of marriage as a project that is strategic and involves work. It's just supposed to sort of fall upon you from the heavens like manna. And so you're not supposed to read books that tell you how to look for a good partner, because obviously if you were a really special person, that partner would have just been provided for you by the universe. And the fact that you need to think about it is somehow supposed to be humiliating. And that seems so backwards, first of all, because anyone who is married will tell you it is a phenomenal amount of work. I love my husband more than anything, but we have had ups and downs like everyone else, and stuff we had to work through, like COVID, where we had different ideas about how like hard we should be isolating, right? And where there's just, there's not, you got to kind of pick one person's going to win sometimes, the other one's going to lose, that person's going to be resentful. There's going to be a ton of stuff like that for every couple to negotiate. And so you actually should be thinking really hard about it and about building a good partnership. But what we want to think about is all of this incredibly superficial stuff. How romantic are they on a date? Not that that's not important, but like we think about the wrong stuff, I feel like, often when we are seeking a partner. And I think that was always true. Certainly my generation was not wise in our early relationships, but it seems much more true in the social media era, because there always seems to be another person who could be perfect just a click away.
Right. So when I wrote Marry Him, there were not dating apps, or at least they weren't sort of everywhere the way they are now.
Yeah.
And what I have a 20-year-old son, so I see, how younger people are navigating the dating world, and also just through my therapy work and the letters that I get to the column. And it seems like this, the paradox of choice. I wrote about this in Marry Him, and I talked to Barry Schwartz, who was, a social
Yep.
scientist who had done research on this. And it was this idea of satisficers and maximizers, that there are people who are satisficers, which sounds very unglamorous to be, it's like we want to be more than satisfied. That's why earlier when I said satisfied, I don't mean a C, I mean an A. But satisfied is kind of like you go into a store and you're looking for a sweater, and it needs to have the right fit, it needs to be the right price, it needs to be the right color. Okay. You go into a store, you find something like that, meets all your requirements, great. You could easily just buy that sweater and you'd be happy. But no, you hide the sweater under the pile so nobody else buys it. You go and you're like, look at all these other stores. Let me just go see if they're having a sale at this store. You're in the mall, so there's a million stores. That's what it's like when
Right.
you're dating. There's a million people. So you go and you find another one. And let's say you find one that's like slightly more on sale, or the color is slightly better, the fit is slightly better. It turns out that if you buy that one, you are more likely to be unsatisfied. You're a maximizer. You're trying to get the best possible. You're trying to maximize in every dimension. We call it optimizing nowadays. And so you get that sweater because of the process that you went through. You are actually less satisfied with that sweater, because you're always thinking, then you're like 2 weeks later, you're going to be walking in the mall and you're going to say, oh, look at that sweater. You can never stop maximizing. The satisficer, the person who bought that first sweater, is really happy with that sweater. They're not looking around. They're not saying, what could I get that's better? They're not looking over their shoulder. In dating, because of these apps, there's the illusion that there are just so many people out there. So if you meet someone and you go on a date and you have a pretty good time, right? Nothing, like nothing like the movies, but a pretty good time. Like, I enjoyed being with this person for an hour. I'm attracted to them. They seem interesting. Um, what do you do? Instead of saying like, okay, let me go out on more dates with them, you might go out on another date with them, but you are immediately, like almost 5 minutes later, back on the apps going, who else is out there? Who else can I go on a date with? So it's very hard to really invest in getting to know another person, because everybody's meeting so many people and thinking, kind of always looking over their shoulder.
I think also because we're getting married later. Keith Humphreys, who's been on this podcast, he's a drug policy researcher, but he's also a psychologist. And he has done a fair amount of clinical work. And he wrote a great essay once that he called The Problem of Grandmother's Lamp. And basically, he talks about going shopping with his grandmother for a lamp. And he's finding all these very nice lamps. And she keeps saying, no, 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 no. And he eventually realizes that the problem is that his grandmother already has so much stuff. And so she's got, well, this wouldn't match the other lamp. This wouldn't match the couch. That's the wrong color for the paint. And then he talks about how he sees people in their 30s and 40s doing this with partners, where would you move for them? No, of course not. Like, they've already got their lives furnished, and they want the person who fits exactly into this incredibly narrow niche, where they have to have my politics, they have to love my family and all of my hobbies and my dog and the paint that I picked out last year. And whereas when you're younger, your life isn't furnished yet. You've got more room in it for different people. Do you think that's correct?
I think what you're talking about is something that's inherent to all relationships, which is the otherness of the other person. That as we get older, we tend to really feel kind of, I want to say the word threatened almost, by the other person's otherness. Um, you know, you don't, wait, what do you mean you think that? What do you mean you feel that? What do you mean you want this? Right? It's really interesting that I think when we're younger, in a weird way, we're almost like we have this romanticized version that we're all going to align, but at the same time, we're more open to the otherness of the other person. We find it almost interesting. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that about you. That's really cool. You like that kind of music? That's interesting. And I think as we get older, the otherness feels foreign to us. It doesn't feel like home. I think what we're looking for in another person is to recreate a sense of home. And I should say, by the way, that even that concept is complicated because, as I write about in my more recent book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, there's a young woman who keeps dating. I call her Charlotte in the book. She's dating all of these men who inevitably disappoint her in all of these ways that very much reflect the ways that she was raised. She had a mother who was depressed, who, when she wasn't depressed, was a fabulous mother, but when she was depressed, was very unavailable. She had a father who kind of like was there or not there. So she had this kind of push pull with both of the parents, and that would happen with the guys. But, it turns out that we often are attracted, if we don't work out whatever the need was that we did not get met when we were younger, we keep trying to bring those people into our world completely outside of our awareness. My colleague Terry Real says we marry our unfinished business. And if we don't process that unfinished business, if we don't make it conscious, if we don't take it out of the unconscious part of ourselves, we see someone like that and we say, oh, you look familiar, come closer, totally outside of our awareness. And then we think this person's great. They're not at all like either of my parents. And then you get to know them and, oh, wow, this person yells a lot. Oh, wow, this person drinks too much. That's familiar. What happened there? This person's withholding. So I think that what we're seeking is a sense of home, but we want to make sure that the sense of home that we're seeking is a healthy home, is a home where we're going to feel safe and nurtured and loved and valued. And sometimes we are bringing all this history to this search, and we don't realize that we keep recreating the same thing, thinking this time I will master it. This time I will get what I want. And of course, that's not what tends to happen.
Yeah, I'm shocked by the number of people, picking up on something you said, that the number of people now who seem to be cutting family off, right? Like, it just seems to come up over and over again, is like it's this all or nothing, you know, this way or that way. And that the otherness of them, the Trump era, a lot of it's been politics. And like my mom, my late mother is from Trump country. And so there was a divide in the family, and we solved that by having a don't ask, don't tell policy.
Mm-hmm.
We just didn't talk about it. And I think that's an underrated solution. But you've had letters about this. I read them. I read articles about this all the time. Can I keep my kid away from my parents? I broke up with my husband because, I divorced my husband because he supported Trump. And like, how do you reconcile yourself when when you realize that there's a really important otherness there?
So you're reminding me of a letter that I got where a woman wrote in and said, my husband wants our 2-year-old son to not be around my parents. She had a good relationship with her parents, to not be around my parents because their values, and I'm assuming politics, don't align with ours, and we don't want him exposed to that. And I don't know that a letter like this would have come into my inbox 20 years ago. But what I said to this woman was, and she said, I want to be around my parents, but I also understand his concerns. What should I do? And what I said to her was that grandparents are really important. And if you want to raise your child with the values that you say you have, which is openness to different perspectives, curiosity about the world, being a critical thinker about different things, that you will not keep your kid in a bubble, that your kid is going to go out into the world and be exposed to all kinds of things. And if you're teaching your kid, I will not interact with anybody who thinks differently than I do, or I will not even wonder about why they might have come to that conclusion or come to that perspective. You could still disagree with it, but understanding them as a whole person, as opposed to just, this is, they're bad because they think this. I don't think that's the son you want to raise. And the other thing was, he's 2 years old, right? They're like playing Legos with him or whatever they're doing. They're drawing, they're going to ice cream. What do grandparents do with a 2-year-old? There was no evidence in the letter that there was something going on here. in terms of like that they were trying to inculcate some kind of value system in him. It might be that when he gets older, they might make some comment that is uh, unpalatable to them. But then what's great is you have an open relationship with your kids. Your kid comes home and says, wow, grandma and grandpa said this, right? Or your kid says something, that you're surprised to hear your kids say. You might say, oh, where did you hear that? Oh, grandma said that, or grandpa said that. Oh, well, what do you think about that? Right? It's not grandpa's bad. It's like, what do you think about that? Your kid might say, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't do that to my friend, or I would, like, I don't know how the kid would, but the point is that you have an open door in your house to talk about really anything. And once you start putting up these roadblocks, you're not only leaving out this, what is the kid going to do, like grandparents' day at school, or when other kids are having these sleepovers with their grandparents or having these wonderful times, and the other kids say, well, what about your grandparents? Oh, I'm not allowed to see them. Why? Right? I mean, it's just you're kind of taking your inability to be open to otherness. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Again, to be open to the fact that these people, your wife's parents, grew up in a certain way that made them think certain things, right? So, like, people can't understand why someone who, let's say, is a good human being would think a certain way. Well, ask them, what made you think that? How did you come to that conclusion, right? This is why we don't seem to be able to do this at all in our country anymore. We can't talk about this stuff. So now families are being divided in this way. A 2-year-old would have no access to his grandparents because the husband is uncomfortable with this.
I remember reading that letter, and I remember being shocked by it. Although at this point I'd heard that a bunch of times. Slate has had similar letters. But I remember thinking as I read it that that maybe this was a him problem, and that that he thinks he's estranged from his parents. Maybe he just thinks of parents as kind of disposable, whereas to me those relationships were so essential, and you should prioritize them over politics.
I pointed that out in the letter. You get sort of one shot with these people, and you have to really be both compassionate and offer something that might help them think about something differently. And it's a real dance. You something that in the therapy room, you have a little more leeway. You have a little more runway there. So you could maybe do it in a couple sessions or 3 sessions instead of one letter. But one of the things that I felt about it, and I brought up very gently in the letter, was he didn't have a good relationship with his parents. And maybe there was even a little bit of envy, outside of his awareness that, to watch that his wife does have a good relationship with her parents. And sometimes when we don't have something, we can be glad that someone we love has it, but also envious of it. And I think that's very human. It's like someone who isn't married might be really glad that their friend is getting married and also be envious that the friend is getting married. Both can be true. Same with the fact that he doesn't have that relationship with his parents. And maybe there was a little bit of, I wish I had that. And it's painful for me to watch my wife have that. And maybe I can create a situation where I don't have to come face to face with my envy by creating some distance between my wife and her parents.
And also, I think if you don't have a good relationship with your parents, you don't really understand what you're asking someone else to give up, right? You've never experienced that from the inside, just how important it is to say that I want you to cut yourself off from your parents and not talk to them. But I want to ask you about why politics has become so important in relationships. Do you have a theory about this? I have many, but I'm not sure any of them are right. Why is this? I grew up on the Upper West Side, which was like the most liberal place in the country outside of Berkeley, California, in the 70s and 80s. But even there, politics was not the deal breaker that it is today. What has happened to us?
A lot of people are feeling helpless and invisible and feeling like they can't live even kind of a middle class life that they wanted and felt they worked hard for. And so I think there's a real divide between people who have just tremendous wealth, not only that exists, but that we see because of everything is so exposed nowadays. So I think maybe in the past there was tremendous wealth, but we didn't see it as much. It was kind of like not our world. It existed behind closed doors. Now you just see it all the time. Um, and you see it sort of, I think a lot of people feel that it's at the expense of their own livelihood or their own ability to live their lives in a certain way. So there's a lot of anger and resentment and helplessness. And I think that when somebody close to you, whether it's a friend or a family member, supports something that feels like it has really tangibly affected your life, you feel like that person has abandoned me.
So when we talk about the things that are important and the things that aren't, the things that should be deal breakers, what is the difference between lowering your standards and maturing them?
I think you'd have to think about the kinds of things that people call deal breakers. Um, in my book, in Marry Him, again, which was written like 20 whatever years ago or something like that. Um, in Marry Him, I interviewed people who would rule out people on a first date for things like, oh, he ordered when they came by and asked if we wanted, like bottled water or tap water, he ordered tap water. And that was a bad sign, right? Because they know that everyone knows you don't drink the water in this city, so he's cheap. That was the right. And you have no idea why the person did, like already you don't know. So this person had no chance. Was the person interesting in other ways? Yes, but look at this issue. All the things that I write in the book, people say, well, that's a specific set of women. And by the way, I'm saying women because one of the studies in the book was there was a survey done where men and women were asked, what would be a deal breaker for going on a second date, and men generally named 3 top things. Here's what she had to have. She had to be interesting to talk to, like you had to enjoy the conversation. She had to be attractive, but not like a model. She just had to be like attractive to him. It wasn't what I think a lot of women imagine. And she had to be kind. So, did she say thank you to the waiter? Did, like that kind of thing. She had to be like a kind person. That got a second date for women. Women named, I forget the number. It was like in the hundreds of things that would be deal breakers. They had all these deal breakers. He wore khaki pants. The tap water thing, all these things that sound like these really entitled, like, who are these women? We don't know any of them. And yet, the survey was really wide ranging. And so it's interesting. And if you actually talk to people, they will come up with all kinds of things. Somebody said he did an Austin Powers impression. Otherwise, I thought it was like a really fun date, but I couldn't get over that. It was so cringe. I couldn't get over it. So it's like, wow, sometimes people are nervous on a first date. Sometimes people don't present, flawlessly on a first date. And we don't seem to, we seem to treat dating like shopping. It's like, I'm the buyer. Let's see if I want to buy you. And we don't consider that someone is evaluating us. Like when you walk into a store and you want to buy something, the sweater, going back to that, is not saying, I don't know if I want you to wear me. I want someone else to wear me.
Someone better looking.
We don't consider that the other person is also evaluating, do they want to be with us? We think we're the buyer the whole time. And that's not relational. And I keep going back to that word relational, because what I see so much when we talk about this loneliness epidemic and how much disconnection there is that people are not learning how to be relational. Relational doesn't mean that you put up with anything at all. Relational, again, means you have very high standards about the things that matter, and you give people grace, and you expect other people to give you grace at times too.
We've talked about what to look for and how to think about like setting expectations for a good marriage, or a good relationship in general, right? How do you distinguish between healthy perseverance, working through your issues, and just staying too long, or actually settling for something that isn't right for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's important to know that both people are really showing up, because that will tell you more about whether you're compatible or you're not compatible. And I see a big gender difference with that. And I think men are at a real disadvantage in the sense of if when men come to therapy, they tend to say things like, I've never told anyone this before. And they might have a great marriage and great friends and great family, and they literally have not told anyone. And it's something that maybe, like, yes, I can see why they feel vulnerable around that, but it isn't like this, like I've been waiting for like a big revelation, and it's like, oh, that's the thing that you've never told anyone. Women will say, I've never told anyone this before, except for my mother, my sister, my best friend. They've told like one or two or three people, but they feel like they haven't told anyone because it hasn't been sort of public knowledge. They haven't shared it with a wider circle of people. So it's interesting that men truly often have no one that they might have shared something that they're really struggling with or thinking about, whereas women might have told a couple people. And then when I see people in couples therapy, sometimes what I'll see is like, let's say it's a woman and a man, and a woman will say, to her husband, I feel like we're disconnected. I feel like we just haven't, I don't really know what's going on inside of you. Can we tell me what's happening? Can you open up to me? And right there on my couch in front of me, he does. And let's say his eyes start tearing a little bit, or he starts crying the more he's talking. Inevitably, some version of her feeling like a deer in headlights is what ensues. And what comes out is, I don't feel safe when you don't share with me what's happening in your life. I feel like we're just kind of ships in the night. I want to feel close to you, and I want us to share that. And at the same time, when he's crying in front of her, she feels unsafe in a way. And so I think that a lot of times what happens is people don't really show up or really talk because people aren't comfortable doing so. I think obviously both men and women have trouble sometimes showing up and talking about things that might feel very tender to them. But I think more often men aren't able to do that. And so women will complain about things like, well, he's just not very emotional, or he's not very forthcoming. And there's a whole world going on inside there. So when you ask about, when relationships aren't working, I would want to make sure that everybody is really showing up first to see what is actually going on with both people. And I think that's where I don't think everybody needs to go to therapy. When you asked, what is therapy for? This is one of the things therapy is for. I think it's really hard to do this if you don't have a space and some kind of guidance on how you can talk about the things that you feel aren't working.
So I wanted to ask you about therapy speak in online dating, because it seems to have taken over things like love bombing and gaslighting, anxious avoidant, narcissistic, trauma, red flags, emotional labor, boundaries. All of this stuff comes up in like everyday conversations about relationships, and it's all over social media. And I am told the dating apps. Is this healthy to be thinking
The
about this
problem
in
is that
terms of therapy?
the problem is that people who are in therapy understand that those terms are being misused. So, if you were to believe social media, if you were like an alien who came from, to see who are these humans, and you looked at social media, you'd say, wow, look at the proportion of the population that are narcissists. Look at the proportion of the population who's getting gaslit. Look at the proportion of the population where nobody can hold anybody's boundaries. Look at all the people who are toxic. And so I think that we're not really using these terms correctly. Like narcissism as a narcissistic personality disorder is a very specific thing. Then there's kind of narcissistic traits that people might have, but I don't know a person on the planet who doesn't have some narcissistic trait at some moment in their life. So I think what people are doing is they're kind of, armchair diagnosing people with things, borderline personality disorder, whatever. And they don't really know what they're talking about. And I think that what it does is it creates a culture of othering people and distancing people without understanding who they really are, why they're doing what they're doing, and not looking at yourself, not looking at, what am I doing in this? That, what are my contributions to an interaction?
Or often it seems like you have to that it's sort of that my problems are kind of a get out of jail free card, and therefore nothing can be expected from me, which is not generally a courtesy they extend to the other person. And it does all seem quite unhealthy to me, but then I'm 53 and I'm in like old lady shakes fist at sky phase where the young people, what's wrong with them? But what can therapy do to prepare someone for a relationship, and what skills should people be developing before they meet the person they want to build a life with?
I think that is a problem, that people think you need to develop your skills before you get into a relationship, or that you have to, really have done, quote, the work before you get into a relationship. Nothing will teach you more about how you interact in a relationship than being in a relationship. It's like going to therapy is like shooting free throws. It's like doing practice in basketball, but you're not in a game. So it's like you can be really good at shooting baskets when you don't have other people on the court, but you get on the court and you're in a game, you're going to learn all different things. Oh, when that person goes there, this is what happens. This play didn't work because of this. I wasn't expecting this. I realized I should have done this differently. You have no idea like what you're going to be like in a relationship until you get in one and start practicing. And I don't mean practice on people and use them that way. I mean, like, truly look for, if you're interested in being in a relationship, be intentional about trying to find a person that you want to be in a relationship with. And if you happen to be in therapy while you are in that relationship, so that you are getting some feedback about what is happening in real time, not retroactively, not, oh, we broke up and now I'm in therapy and let me tell you about the 3 years that I was dating this person. I want to hear it in real time, because now we have something to work with. That is the best time to be in therapy, is when you're in a relationship and you are trying to understand how you relate.
Is there a piece of popular dating advice you wish people would stop taking?
I'm so the last person to ask about this. I know I'm not your target audience for this, because I'm not really paying attention to there's so much bad dating advice. Like, do we have another hour? There's just so much of it out there.
Pieces of advice. The top 3 worst pieces of advice that you see people struggling with.
I see people doing things that I think are really counterproductive to finding the kind of partner that they want. I don't know what advice they're getting. Clearly it's not helping them, so I'm assuming it's bad advice. But I see people doing lots of things like, again, like ruling people out very early on with these kind of trivial faux deal breakers. And again, high standards, but just some of these things I think are ways of, maybe they have trouble with intimacy. They don't want to get close to someone, even though they believe that they do, and they believe with every fiber of their being that they want to. But then you see again and again that there's always something wrong with someone. That says to me, this is a pattern. This is something where if you're always finding fault, there's never anybody who meets your criteria. Then maybe you're afraid of what would happen if you really got involved with someone, if someone really saw you. And so you never let it get to that point. A lot of it is really sort of relational. Again, I keep going back to that, but I think that, we want easy answers. We want, give me the top 10 things you should do if you're dating. Give me the top 10 things you shouldn't do if you're dating. And what I want to say is, look at how you relate. What keeps happening? What is the thing that you keep saying, well, the problem is out there. By the way, it is hard out there. I am not denying that. It is extremely hard out there. But is there something that makes it harder for you? That, where you keep ending up in the same kinds of situations, or you keep coming up against the same, backing up against the same wall? What is going on? And often we don't know, we learned about relationships from what we observed growing up. And sometimes you think that that is the right way to approach relationships. Or you say, oh, my parents did this. I would never do that. I will never do that when I'm a parent. And then you find yourself one day, these words are coming out of your mouth and you're like, who is talking right now? Am I channeling someone who's not in the room right now? What is happening? And it's completely outside of our awareness until we make ourselves aware of it. A lot of us are doing things in relationships that are just, things that we are not aware of. And that, I think, is the beauty of what can happen in therapy, is you can learn specifically for you what are some of the things that are getting in the way. There are definitely structural things out there that make it really, really hard to date. So that's not, no one's blaming you for that. But then the question is, what happens when you get into a relationship, or you're about to get into a relationship, and then things start to fall apart? Let's look at that.
So I am going to pivot us to our final question, which is a happy question. We ask all of our guests the same thing. What is one thing that makes you optimistic about the future of dating and relationships more generally?
I think it's the other side of the coin of what we've been talking about, which is this idea of people kind of talking about mental health and therapy, and maybe they're misusing it. But the other side of that is, I think people are more aware of like how important their own emotional health is, and how important the emotional health of their partner is. And people didn't used to talk about that, right? So you just, that person is this way, or I think that people are very aware that it's extremely important that you are choosing someone who has emotional maturity and emotional stability. And I think that, this whole like, I'm going to pick someone because they're exciting, or I'm going to pick someone like that. I think people are more aware now. I think people are sort of, obviously that stereotype still exists. But I think that people at a younger age, when it's really important as you're forming your ideas about what partnership is and who you should be with, I think people are learning at younger ages how important it is to find a partner where it feels calm, and it feels stable, and it feels good, and it feels trusting. That other stuff that we see in movies, that it's just, that's not, like all the stuff that happens in movies, you don't want to be married to that person. It makes a good plot for a movie. But do you really want to be in suspended animation all the time? Most people don't.
Yeah. I think that was an important learning for me. I mean, not that I do get butterflies still when I think about my husband and our
but that doesn't mean the butterflies aren't there. I just want to say one thing. You get butterflies because this becomes something that gives you butterflies.
Yes. This is the most hopeful thing I've heard all week. So thank you, Lori Gottlieb, for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for the conversation.